One last thing, if it ever goes dark in the middle of the day, just stay in your house and hide, the driver said before falling silent. Night chocolate at the bizarre suggestion. As if it hadn't been enough to instead it's ridiculous. And nighttime curfew and forbid any romantic attachments with you until the town play also wanted me to hide from the dark. This ain't no joke, detective. If you can't follow these instructions, we're turning around and I'm taking you back to the city. He slowed down the car and looked back at me. He hadn't been the friendliest person. All right, there wasn't any solar eclipse scheduled for this year. Before the drive you could answer my half-serious job at his rules. A van came speeding towards us, he told us, to the side of the narrow road, allowing the van with its flashing blue lights to pass unobstructed. And the split second, 2 police officers. They seemed to be in a hurry, I said, expecting the driver to explain seriously. Why are they driving out of town in such a rush? I continue to. They're looking for Patrick. Lydia tried to leave town a few days ago. I guess a local hunter must have found him. The second commented my curiosity. The ominous insinuation said, play me in his car. I offered to drive into town myself, but the powers that be had insisted I get picked up, as the road was treacherous and confusing. Based on what I had seen that far, and they hadn't lied, the road was broken and in dire need of maintenance, and there are almost no signs to get our way on our journey. And before long we passed by the first road sign that I had seen an hour, just a simple piece of wood with the Townsend name, no more than 5 and minuscule buildings that were supposed to be houses. The driver parked outside one of them and he got outside. After you drop off your stuff, I'm taking you down to the sheriff's department, he said. Before we entered my humble abode, the driver walked over to the power box and flipped the switch. Dim lights flickered to life daily, illuminating the dark interior. The place was run down and barely comparable to a 2-star motel. Not that it mattered. While I was on the job, luxuries have never been a part of my work. As we entered a Bugs and Instax hybrid room for all purposes other than that area, there were 2 doors, one leading to the bathroom and one with the sign reading that curfew pantry. I tried to open it, but the door wouldn't budge and I'll come and slide. I asked, well, not speaking of word, the driver after the third is. So what happened? Who opened, revealing hundreds of cans and non-perishable goods, and it was enough to feed a family for about a year. I'm only staying for a month, you know that, right? I asked, and nervously he decided it's just for emergencies. If it suddenly goes dark, there's no telling how long we'll be stuck for her. So in case the sun vanishes, I just stay here. For how long? I asked half sarcastically, the still skeptical to the whole situation. He thought for a moment before responding, usually just a couple of hours. He drilled off. Usually he fell silent again. Just drop your dang bags and let's go visit the sheriff, he ordered without further argument. I put my bags down on the table, careful to keep them away from the bug-infested floor. I chuckled briefly to myself, thinking that in the very least I wouldn't be lonely. As we drove through town I got a better look at the entire, and they all seemed so ancient, as if they'd been built back in the 50s and subsequently forgotten about. The very few people out on the streets are looking cold and exhausted beyond measure, none of them very excited to have a stranger visit them. It seemed. The sheriff's department didn't fare much better than the rest of the town. It was a mix between an office building and a jail, too small to keep many criminals in place, but I suppose that small crime wasn't much of an issue, at least officially. The set all been ruled too accidental. An older man came to greet us as we had a ride, accompanied by 2 younger officers. He wore a smile on his face, a tired one of that, but the first sign of friendliness that I've met. I reached out my hand and he gripped it firmly. "You must be Robert," he said as he shook my hands. "My name's Bill Riley. I'm the sheriff of around these parts." The other two smiled. They just stared at me with a suspicion in their eyes. "Why is he here anyways?" "One of the best." The sheriff turned backwards on with a smile vanishing, replaced by a sterling look. The man fell silent and the sheriff redirected his attention towards me. "No, don't mind them, it's good to have you here. We're in dire need of a forensic pathologist, especially after he said before, 'I'm not a pathologist, not anymore at least,' but your file said that was a long time ago," I said quickly. The sheriff took the hint and didn't push the issue any further. Before we could get inside, a van pulled up behind the building. It was the same one that I had seen speeding past us as we entered town. The sheriff rushed over to assess the situation. "Play Holiday covered stretcher out from the back and you found him?" the sheriff asked, surprised. The officers nodded and carried the stretcher inside. We followed them in through a set of metal doors which led to an old-fashioned autopsy lab. The distinct smell of formaldehyde burned my nose. As we got inside, the sheriff pulled the covers off the stretcher, which revealed the pale corpse of a middle-aged man. While the cosplay death wasn't immediately apparent, I suspected some sort of cardiovascular condition with his eyes, a deep breath from subconjunctival bleeding and his legs swollen. "Why did you find them?" the sheriff I asked, "just at the edge of town and he didn't make it across the border." They all stared helplessly at the dead man on the table before directing their attention to me. "Robert, would you mind, assistant?" Trepidation, but the look of mild concern. He put his hand on my shoulder. "Here, look. And I wouldn't ask if I had another choice. I'll stay behind and now. But I just can't do it on my own after. I need eternity of uncomfortable silence." I realized that most of the officers in the room, human being up into their most basic parts, was something entirely different that I never gotten used to. Together we jotted on all the basic information regarding the man who had come to, known as Patrick Lawrence, after taking down his weight, height to age, and observed all the minor wounds and bruises and other recognizable marks on his body. "Play, come to get the scalpel. You don't have to be here for this." And I said as I looked at the profusely sweating sheriff, "I'm fine, so you have an autopsy lab, but no pathologist on site." I asked more to get his mind off the sight in front of him. Then, out of curiosity, "Yeah, we do," we drilled off. "Then where is he?" I created the typical Y-shaped incision necessary for easy access, and then I put my hand on the newly formed hole ready to expand or open his cavities inside. I expected resistance. I fumbled around for a bit with the wet and slightly warm sensation of it. Cane organs are brushing against my hand. Panic started to rise of my body, yet as I realized that instead of half-rotten organs, I found no, they can't be right. I'm almost to myself. What I kept expanding until his entire abdomen and chest cavity were visible there within Patrick Lawrence, instead of a heart long as a kidneys and a liver, and there was nothing, just a few chunks of what resembled a mist me, as if someone had him to pieces from his eyes. The two of us stared at the empty corpse on the table, and the sheriff as disgusted, as you must have been. He didn't seem all that surprised. "Did you know?" I asked him quietly but with a demanding tone. "Know what? What state did the corpse be in?" I continued to more agitated than before. He said no, I didn't. According play the Dave reports about the town that I have been given. At least a dozen people showed up, Dad, every year, while the number on its own was ludicrous. For such a small town, it would be impossible not to have noticed their complete lack of internal organs. Do you really expect me to believe that, after all the people who died here in the past few decades, that not shut up like this? That's the thing. They never did show up, he said, as we left the partially skeletal remains. We always found the months after the fact, and by then it wouldn't be much of a surprise of wildlife had stripped their insides. But this is something else. You put the photos away, and he likes his office, so you never found any fresh hollow corpses? No, not really. Well, actually, Patrick, his last autopsy seemed to have disturbed him. What happened 3 days ago? Our local pharmacist went missing at night, only found in the next day. He had long since died, and Patrick did the autopsy, and he kept raving about the emptiness inside, making no sense. It was like he had completely witches and all the weird consider in the job, but we didn't know exactly what he saw. He burned the body before we could stop him, and he fled town, and we exited the building to report to the other officers, all of them smoking, relaxing, as if nothing had happened. He briefed the others while I lit up a cigarette to my owner, a nasty habit that I quit years ago, but considering the circumstances, it felt appropriate. You better get home, Robert. I will catch up in the morning and I tell us to have. Finish the cigarettes under the ground. Wait, first you're going to tell me what the heck is going on here, and tomorrow, I promise, he said as he reached out his hand. I appreciate your help today. I really do. Magically, I agreed to leave. The driver took me back to my house without speaking a word, and I headed inside to get ready for a restless night. It was an uncomfortable place to live, with boring food in a bathroom that had no functioning light, meaning that I had to use the provided flashlight just to go to the bathroom, search the pantry for something to eat, and, to my surprise, I found an unopened bottle of whiskey just resting there, and I drank it while going over the case files that I've been given. Prior to my departure, towards at 10 o'clock, 2 tactics have been sent there before me, all who returned unsettled, but none the wiser regarding these strange deaths. By the time I had finished half the bottle, I drifted off to an uneasy slumber, asleep, filled with complicated nightmares from the past, sunset, impossible situations that I struggled to escape, but that it ultimately landed me here in Tenebres. I woke in the early morning of the next day with a splitting headache and, in the overabundance of regret my glasses at the time, to see that it had only gone past 7 a.m., meaning that I still had ample time to recover her. The first daylight peeked through my window and I grumbly covered them with curtains, hoping to get another hour of sleep. Before I got up I could have sworn only a second passed before I woke again to the bizarrely warm air around me. I got up intending to open a window when I noticed that it was completely dark outside. Surprised, I started to panic, worried that I had slept through the entire day, hungover, and annoyed. I grabbed my phone to call the sheriff, and when I noticed the time 7:42 Rihanna, only 40 minutes have passed, I stuck my head out through the window and, trying to get a look around, even the street lights seemed to be obscured by the darkness and their yellow glow barely visible. I dialed the number to the sheriff's department, but they didn't pick up. And then I attempted to call her for Riley's personal number. He picked up almost immediately, but his voice was obscured behind a static-like massive sound. He managed to get out before the connection broke down. In bed, the driver's warning and plan on loop in the back of my mind: if it ever goes dark in the middle of the day, just stay in your house and hide. And then I saw someone to move out on the street, just a shadow in the dark yellow. I called my voicemail for, as if the air itself had grown too thick. The shadow hurt. My call then turned towards me. It moved with unnaturally exaggerated movements, seeming to skip stats. At first I thought it was one of my neighbors, but even as I went under the partially dim street light, it still didn't come into proper view. It dawned on me that the thing wasn't human. I wanted to duck away from the winter and hide, but what was? Frozen in fear. My eyes kept focused on the slowly approaching figure. And then I noticed another shadow approaching from down the street, and another, dozens of shadows, water in the streets of cannabis, all of them heading towards me. Self-preservation might not be my most redeeming quality, so when I saw a figure walking around on the darkness, my first instinct was that facts mixed with the skull-crushing headache I had received as a parting present from the alcohol and caused me to mess up monumentally enough to call out into the dark. There on the streets, hundreds of dog figures approached me near shadows, with features resembling a humanoid. While they hadn't necessarily seen me, they had heard me idiotically, called out the window out of sight, and I closed the blinds, turned it on to fight the darkness. And then I noticed a few scribbles on a piece of paper posted under the light switch. Leave on now. I turned on every switch that I could find, hoping it could repel the bizarre creatures from entering my temporary home. And then, after I locked all the doors and windows, I collected my mobile phone on my gun and they provided flashlight before boarding myself up inside the play. With little hesitation, I decided to call the sheriff again. I hope you can give me some further instructions on how to survive the oncoming nightmare I lost. Despite my best efforts, the call wouldn't go through. I glanced out of my service weapon and considered whether hiding it or an escape would be my best option. But even if bullets could name the creature, I wouldn't have nearly enough ammunition to put a dent in the horse. The driver told me only a couple of hours had passed, and while I pray that it was true, something within me felt instinctively doubtful. I kept as quiet as I could, even my eyes fixed on the door in front of me and to hand on the gun, while I couldn't hear the creatures move around, and I knew they had gotten clothes once he lights outside light bulb inside the pantry and my exceptionally strong flashlights left to keep me company. How does passed and I held my breath. As I waited I felt like my inevitable demise. And then days passed and the darkness were made. But I try my best to preserve the battery on my phone, only turning it on every few hours to check the time. Necessity's time became a foreign concept was on my phone. To keep, I had to rely on my own internal clock, which have been wrecked by the lack of a day and night cycle based on the growth of my beard. I assume that 2 weeks have passed by the time that I went to my gun as more of a way out than means of self-defense. By then the light outside of my door I had completely vanished, and taking the creatures a long time to consume all the lights. But once they were done, I could see slivers of shadows penetrate from out of the door, which seemed to keep them away. But I only had so much battery. Power, including the extra battery, is left in the pantry. Day by day my sanity started to fade. Every thought was occupied by the best desire to escape, be it through a heroic act of defiance or by a bullet to my own head. And then, as if a switch had been flagged, a beam of a bright light appeared from under the door. Hey heaven, play light, brighter and more beautiful than anything I had ever seen. I stared at it and just believed it could be daylight. I didn't know, and I didn't even dare open the door, and I must have sat there for an hour before a familiar voice finally broke my trance. Robert, are you in there? I heard the Sheriff Callie. I carefully started dismantling that I placed in front of the door and stumbled out into the bright hall of my home. The light of day hit me with the blinding power. Thank God you're still here. I thought we lost you for sure. Sheriff Riley explained as I opened the door. I just stared at him for a moment before I fully believed that he was real. What happened? My stuttered Robert tried to hold back a Christmas inside and closed the door to keep me out of. I caught a brief glance in my own reflection in the window, greasy hair on trimmed beard and bloodshot eyes. How long was I in there? I asked. 19 days, missed, the longest time we've ever heard of, as he noticed. I'm sorry, Robert, I absolutely reached after being trapped in my own filth for almost 3 weeks. The sheriff seemed to slightly. It wasn't his fault that I've been trapped in the pantry. If I hadn't called out to the creatures, I could have stayed safely inside my own home and lived an isolated about comfortable life. I had a lot of questions, but in my tired stage all I could think of was to clean myself up. I'm going to have a shower, I said. He nodded, understand, as I watched the past weeks off my body and I finally started to formulate a plan. I have been so preoccupied with surviving that I hadn't been able to question the reality of the situation. I decided that the best course of action would be to call a headquarters back in the city. I was out of my dad and I needed serious reinforcements. When I got up from the bathroom I saw Riley talking on the radio. What they distract? Expression on his face. What's wrong? I just got a word from the other is, we've lost some people. The others are out looking, but the situation seems pretty bleak. He said how many? I don't know what current couch is, 24 East. As long as God of Darkness only lasted a couple of days, and that was almost 30 years ago. This is the words got stuck in his throat, though he had feared far better than myself, and the people that had been taken were his own friends and family that he had known his whole life, and it had taken a toll on Emma. A surge of pity filled my body as I realized the true gravity of the situation. Sheriff Riley, we're going to figure this out. I promise we just need to get help from the city here to let people know what's going on here. He nodded, you're right, what are we going play? Tell them the truth. I charged my phone and I attempted to call my supervisor. He was a good albeit skeptical person, but even he can reject the call for help. With several dozen people missing, the phone wouldn't even ring. Not a single borrow, a single visible on the little screen. All the concept we had a factory have been cut off from civilization, and I ran through a few ideas, ready to suggest that we just drive, but before I could formulate a proper plan, someone called Riley over the radio. Sheriff, you there? A voice said on the other end. He picked it up and responded, James, yeah, I'm here. What's going on? The officer said, what did you find? There's hiding. We couldn't reach any of them over the radio. These creatures, what are they? I asked as we sped on the road. Riley glanced over me with a look of confusion on his face. What creature is it? I saw shadows of water through the dark, just barely resembling humans, and there were hundreds of them. Before I could ask any further questions, a car came speeding towards us from the opposite direction. Riley swerved to the side and narrowly avoiding a collision, while the other car broke violently, skidding into the ditch. I'm panicked. Man stumbled from the car, his face bruised from the crash. James, what the heck are you doing? Robbie, Austin, they're dead, they're all dead. I just left them there. I'm sorry, I couldn't. He stuttered. Jesse frantically looked around my Sarah towards the horizon for more. James and Florida. The light at the horizon seemed to cut off, fading harshly from day to night as pitch black clouds are moving towards us for each second, past the wall of darkness, a group closer. It was what? It terrified James, and what did? Killed the other, his sheriff. We need to move, I said, as he tried to comfort James. I turned around and noticed the same darkness that occupied the horizon behind us. By the time we had picked James up, The darkness had involved the entire town, shrinking by each second past did. It already killed most of the police force, and I was starting to fear by the time that we got back to town and there wouldn't be anyone left. I don't want to die. I don't want to die. James kept repeating, as he said, that in the back seat, the shadow engine exploded towards town while we spent on the road in a desperate attempt to reach safety before it was too late. James was in shock, and while I could have given him a few words of conference, my sense that he needed something to swiftly bring him back to reality, without warning I turned around and I slapped him from me on his cheek. He immediately snapped back to attention. What was that for? Yes, but at least he was focused. I need to break you away from your hysteria. A crude method, I know, but it's worth. It didn't still. Shocked, but thankful, I peered out through the back window of our speeding car, watching as the darkness grew closer at an accelerated pace. This hasn't happened before. Right, I have asked why. They didn't even respond to his. Eyes were fixed on the road. Play some panic and determination. Just as town came into view, a massive wall of darkness and shot into the road, cutting off our land completely. Watch out, but it was futile. Riley swerved away from the darkness on the other lane, causing the car to spin uncontrollably, before putting us at an abrupt stop only a few feet away from the dark. No, 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 keep driving, James, play out the window. The shadow immediately retreated back, or attraction from the light, the headlights. Ruffy had already reached out to turn the high beams on the bright light. I shoved the shadows away just long enough for us to make a swift escape. James, are you all right? I asked. If he didn't respond, he just said, motion. James Riley, I'm done, he's dead, I said as I checked his pulse. Also, I thought about performing CPR, but his abdomen and chest seemed to suck it in, as if he had simply been hollowed out by the shadow with no time to stop, and we let James's corpse just sit there while we made our way into town. By the time that we drove past the first neighborhoods, the darkness had formed all around town, leaving nothing but James, a lifeless body, behind an older man who I recognized as the name of Driver, Medicine. We need to get inside the station. He said it was a chaotic retreat back into the sheriff's department by the darkness. As we ran inside the building, something emerged from the edge of the shadow wall, just looming on the border. What's that, Riley Austin? It was one of the things that I had seen wandering in the dark, the beans that kept me trapped within my pantry for weeks. It's them, it's the creatures that I saw. I yelled in panic. George and Riley both instantly put their flashlights towards that, and the shadow creep nature of the being revealed itself. They weren't shadows, but mangold masses of flashing human organs. How together by an unseen forest. It was as if someone had created a poor reconstruction of a person having nothing more than guts and muscle to work with. What are those things? Riley asked with a traveling voice. I don't know, but let's keep them away. And we mounted a few searchlights on the outside of the building, and if you find it before a barricade, play doors to the station. How long till the dark goes away? I asked no one in my hearts what the answer would be. I don't think it will, not this time, George said quietly. The darkness kept growing closer, slowly consuming the light and breaking through our barricade. Is there any way out of town? I asked. Only the main road, but it doesn't matter, we can't leave play. Do you have any better suggestions? I asked. It's only a matter of time before they break through, and once they do, we're all going to die. Riley kept quiet for a moment while he pondered his response. The other side collected any weapons in life they could find to keep these shadows at bay, but it could do a little more than buy us, if you are, as though we had an overabundance of food and ammunition. Electricity was a scarce resource. How long can we keep this place running without anyone to run the power station? We have about 12 hours. George responded, "Sorry, Sheriff, I think this is it for us." I looked at him in disbelief that he had given up so easily, without a fight. "No, we can't just give up. Listen, I saw these 3 patrol cars outside. We could on my lights to them, and at least the population had seemed to be on the other side, even though I don't 50 years ago, when we had our first balance of darkness. At first it was nothing more than an oddity that we couldn't explain, something we just accepted as a weird phenomenon. But then people started disappearing, always in the dark, never to be found again." He drilled off. "A shadow was heard from outside Jolton. I saw to attention. Through the window we could see a few glimmers of light to vanishing as one of these searchlights broke down. Time was running out, of course. Once we were hit with the horizons, lords in the dark, people tried to leave. The thing is that something happened to the population here, those that were born here, those that spent too much time in town. They became bound to the place, finding themselves physically incapable of leaving. Those that ignored their instincts, those who tried to leave anyway. They simply vanished without a trace. And the kids, I asked. Eventually, we decided to just stop bringing more people into this nightmare. The last child was born in 2000. As he finished the last sentence, mixed feeling of anger and pity filled me. Why didn't you ask for help? Trust me, we tried, but who would believe us? We brought in detectives from different cities hoping that they would see the darkness, that they would finally help us, but none of her did until you came." Another shattered sounded outside, as broken glass fell to the ground and more of the flesh-bound shadows emerged from the dark. "So that's it?" Then, after an uncomfortable long moment of silencer, George finally spoke up. "Sheriff, how about the pillar?" "Yes, don't be ridiculous," Riley shot back. "It's the source of the darkness, the driver's side door. This isn't the time for your stories, don't. I understand your trepidation. And go on that, Sheriff, but we ain't got no other option. You don't even know where it is." "No one does." Riley said. "No, but I know where my father, brother, and your son were last seen. I'll leave the search, but I can't do it alone." "Why, then?" Everyone had fallen completely silent and just confused as I was waking with me. "What exactly are we going to do?" I asked Robert Tournament inside. "We're going to destroy the darkness. As children, we were told that darkness isn't something to fear. Our parents gave us empty promises that there were no monsters hiding in the shadows. They said that whatever creaks and cracks we heard, they were figments of our imagination, on the edge of our vision. The threat. I'm scared beyond recognition. We were right if you're the dark." And after arrive at 10 o'clock, my childhood fear of the dark was revived. I quickly realized that it's perhaps the most logical instinct of humanity here, one that we're even born with, developed to keep us alive since the dawn of humanity thousands of years ago. Detective Riley had just announced a plan, ludicrous, suggestion 20, same person, you have to remind, our only chance of survival. How the heck are we supposed to do that? We've got explosives available, if the pillar really exists, and that's our best bet. And how are we supposed to find it? I kept asking before I got the chance to answer my question, another like the ground sheriff. We've got to go. Now, though. There are 3 patrol cars outside. We only had enough portable lights to secure one of the dozen or so Survivor series. The only Ford would venture out, Donna, the mission Riley, George, John, and myself. John was one of the few surviving cops and among the youngest inhabitants of Tenebres. He volunteered without hesitation. "All right, we're dividing the lights into. Have to keep the building lit up." In the rest of the car ride, they ordered as we got into the survivors, into the autopsy room, without windows, and with heavy doors. It may need safest place for those who stayed behind the placing ourselves in front of the exit, stepping out would most likely lead to certain death, but we had no other options. "You all have a better chance than behind. This is your last chance to back out." George said he was an odd fellow with every inhabitant of Tenebra, stuck in town, physically incapable of leaving now to pick me up. Why he could break the rule of the dark remained a mystery. John looked at me, a look of horror stuck in his face. Though he was eager to help, he lacked the experience. "The rest of us, let's just go," he said nervously, and with that Riley unlocked the door. We watching formation through the dark, each holding onto a powerful searchlight. It kept the shadows at bay, allowing us to the car. Within a couple of minutes, we were driving away from station on a road of sacrifice unaudible. So I relieved as a false sense of security watched over me. The car had been secured by lights, creating a perimeter of light around us, but it wouldn't last long. "How far is it?" I asked. "An hour's drive and a good day," George said. "But this isn't a good day." George drove the car slowly. What a limited line of sight ahead of us. It was a dangerous track to travel. At the edges of our perimeter, shadow creatures wound. They observed us from a distance, so now absorbing the light strain in our lives. In the process, John focused the beams at the monsters wherever they stand. "It just keep them away," Riley said. He stuck his head out of the window and pointed the searchlights towards the clusters of shadow creatures. They screeched as the light burned them, chasing them away. "If play temporary, George, you need to tell us everything you know about the Pillar of Darkness." "I ordered it," he said, rolling over how to answer my loaded question. "Back on, my man was the sheriff when the darkness first introduced itself. You led us search and rescue operation into the heart of a woman, which wasn't anything we had experienced before in our small and peaceful town." He shut off as the road narrowed. We drove over a rock and sticking out from the ground, causing one of the lights to shatter. John quickly responded by shifting the rest. "Crap. If we lose another light, we're screwed," John said in panic. George slowed down even further, keeping his eyes fixed on the road and the end of the search. My father radioed in it. "You clearly had found something in the woods, some sort of dark structure. What is limited vocab?" He described it as a pitch black, a pillar, that's all the lights in front of them, despite orders to wait for backup, and he approached the thing that was the last thing we heard before and they went silent. They were the first victims of the darkness was expand a massive area. What's the limited information that we had? It would take us weeks to cover the entire grid anyway, and they sent out a second search party to look for my dad and he missing officers when those went missing as well, and they sent out a third, as you might have guessed by now, after the third party went missing and they never sent it for it. I can tell by Riley's unimpressed demeanor that it was a story that you heard before. Well, that's not exactly proof that the pillar exists. Could have been anything, Riley said. Well, that's does. You haven't heard. The whole story is a part that I never told anyone. George, back what you said, something, that single sentence. I shut us all up, pledging the car into definitely in silence the pillar of the S. It was back when I first joined the police force. Before driving, I've grown up without knowing what happened to my old man. After repeated refuses to reopen the investigation, I decided to take things into my own hands. So I set off into the depths of attendance. Getting to the so-called forbidden zone, no sooner had to cross the border, the air changed around me. It had been cloudy, sure, but in the span of just a few seconds the sky went dark. He said I was young, afraid, like in the guts to continue. I decided to turn back. Only, no matter what direction I had it in, the sky kept getting darker. Within an hour I was hopelessly lost it and getting desperate. No, I didn't know exactly where I was hiding, that I could feel the presence of the pillar. They needed sustenance, and I was just like my father, had darkness enveloping around me. Before I passed out, George brought the car to a screeching halt. The airfield dance and the powerful lights we had knotted to our car. I just didn't reach as far anymore. And we're here, George said, as a surge of dread washed over me and we exited the car, surprised to not be over by the shadows they simply observed us from a distance, keeping away from our lives, even though hours passed as we ventured to deeper into 10 of us woods. It didn't take long before the last searchlights finally died, leaving us with pathetically weak flashlights. I looked around to flashing my light at the occasional shadow that reached out from the dark, standing by George's side, and I felt oddly confident, as of the darkness get in touch with us. I couldn't say the same for John and Riley Hoover, repeatedly assaulted by the monsters, leaving George fine. I rushed over to help them when one of the shadows reached out for me and I thought of the ground. Riley pulled me back up as another shadow reached out for us. The end of security that I had felt only moments ago. Advantage that. And then I saw George still walking confidently through the darkness. Not a single shadowing to touch him. George, the shadows, and I said enough. George was the only person to ever face the heart of the darkness and live, and did somehow kept us safe. We kept walking in silence. For each step that we talked, the forest grew thicker, dead branches, Henry. In our progress, despite the dense vegetation, there were no signs of life. Even the trees long since perished, with their dry dog corpses. All that were left behind. No more. Getting closer, George said, "How do you know about your S?" "I don't know, I just do." There is no point of arguing. Even with George's weird connection to the pillar, we had no other option but to blindly follow. John wants a bit of head. He was young compared to Robbie and George, and far better shape. "John, slow down, will you?" I asked. Did anyone notice anything? A shadow had gotten inside and consumed his godson, all because he stopped a few feet too far ahead. How did that happen? I don't know. He just kept walking. George responded, and then John spoke. "I have to keep going. I have to keep going, I have to. It needs us. It needs to feed a cat, generating a quiet reach time." His chest sounds good as his lungs were eaten and he quickly lost the ability to speak. Yet his mouth kept moving, a hopelessly futile attempt at talking. "Sheriff, we have to keep moving," I said. We left John's body behind, no words spoken. We had accepted our dust the moment that we agreed to the mission, but if we could save the town, it would be. I'm worth the risk. The shadows followed us from a distance as we proceeded into the darkness. Our lights were dying and our hopes. Within. Hours passed, if not days, as we wandered blindly towards the heart of the darkness, awaiting our much anticipated death. And then I noticed the light for my flashlight bending in the wrong direction to the shadows. I turned around, noticing the dark tendrils and stretching along the ground, leading to a massive bulge in structure. It was the pillar. It was magnificently horrific, stretching endlessly far up into the sky. Rotting flesh covered its surroundings, and any light getting too close immediately faded into its advantage of black surface. It twitched in response to our president, and the shadows were quick to surround us as we got closer. "Wow, I can't believe it," Riley said in shock. "Yeah, but don't stop to admire it. Keep the perimeter clear while I fix the explosives," George said. Riley and I kept the area as safe as we could while George went to work with the other, eating out the light. We could only clear a few feet ahead of us by then. Most of these shadows were flying around with their dark frames. "They carry the cancel," the timer called, exclaimed. There, on the edge of the darkness, do the amazing remnants of John, his body broken, carried by the shadow that occupied his empty husk. "John, hello." He was too quick for us to react to, but even then he didn't aim for me and or Riley, but the one person. The shadows could never touch it. George let out a quick grunt as the bullet had tore through his throat. Riley kept his flashlight fixated on the mutated remnants of John, causing him to drop the gun. I rushed to help George, and his carotid artery had been severed and is bleeding into his own. All we could do was stare at me as he coughed up chunks of half-coagulated blood. Despite the agony, he seemed to peace, as a dying was the preferable choice over her life. And Tenebrosa, what's going on right now? Still keeping the light to point it at the shadow, Jose. And then, without a single word, George died in my arms. He had spent the past 50 years living in the dark, and you will never see the light again. He's gone," I said. The light in his eyes, and with that, the power of that, kept the shadows at bay. Without hesitation, they approached us, ready to add our growing pillar. Riley rushed back towards the explosives, knowing that we couldn't get to a safe distance in time. He grabbed me and he pushed me out of the way. "Bro," I fought away from the pillar, which focused their attention on Riley here. We gave each other one final glimpse, and I saw the undeniable feeling of guilt in his eyes, regret that he had brought me into ton of bread, and regret that they hadn't tried to destroy the darkness before this was his last chance. The ground shook under my feet. The tendrils had awoken, trying to grab onto me while I stumbled away from the pillar behind me. What's the Hillary giving way to lights and its way? Once that recovered from the initial shock and I stared up at a clear blue sky, I got to my shaking feet and returned to the side of donation. Robbie and George had been evaporated alongside the remains of the pillar. It was over. The truck back to town was monotonous, not sure what I would find once I got there. 10 of us was a beautiful place, a fact that had been observed by the dark for so many years. I linked up with the last survivors, all of them speechless. Together we mourned the loss of those who had perished, gone but never forgotten. They could finally leave 10 of us and find a new opportunities. To my surprise, most of them chose to stay behind. For better or for worse, the town had been their home and they had nothing on the outside. At least it had been given a second chance and could once again flourish as it had so many years ago. I returned back to my own city a few days later with no clue how to report what I had seen. I'm sure it'll come up with something more believable than the table that I have. Not that it matters what the public thinks, but to honorary George and all those who died, I wanted to share the truth about the Tenebrosa didn't die for nothing.